Let's start by playing the video. It's loud enough. I think everyone will take their seats, enjoy the video, and then we'll start right after that. Okay?
Thank you.
Anybody loving me? Okay, let's start with the video, please. Okay.
From Beirut, in New Delhi, from Jerusalem, in Jordan, in Doha, in Istanbul, in Cairo, in here, in Abu Dhabi.
All roads are barricaded to Taksim Square.
These are the midday prayers. You can see the security.
He's been shaking people's hands. He's been hugging children. This is the old city of Jerusalem, and this is a melting pot of religion.
What is the nature of your support for Hamas? Can we clear this up? Let me push you once more on this, because this is important. How big a concern should this be for not just Turkey, but the West? Tell me something even locals might not know. Who is the biggest influence? Is it still family?
Connect the world with Becky Anderson on CNN.
It was short and sweet, wasn't it?
That's the wonderful Becky Anderson from CNN. I'm honored to be here today with all of you. Maishidia, hi. Great respect for you. It's really a pleasure to be here. And our country needs people like you, needs courage, freedom fighters, and most of all, good journalists who doesn't only cover the story. Hello. Hi, ma'am. Thank you. Ça va? So I was saying, our country needs courage, freedom fighters, and good journalists who doesn't only cover the story, but also live it, sometimes until encountering death, maybe. So thank you for doing whatever you're doing here. Now, what does constitute a big story today, and what price journalists and media outlets are paying while pursuing this story? Who are we competing with? And what is the function of the media in the age of citizen journalism and social media? Are we leading or just reacting and being used by terrorists or manipulated by governments and special interests? Who dictates the story nowadays? Since the Watergate scandal, was there a story that was a turning point that brought a president down or changed the course of history? Is our reporting simply part of a chain of events that shape history? Are we still influencing public opinion? We live in a country, for instance, with daily scandals, but zero repercussions. Despite the advent of modern technology and the way we consume and distribute information, we are still struggling today to answer broadcasters' old challenge. Do we broadcast what interests people or broadcast what in people's interest? Are we still following the traditional rule? If it bleeds, it leads, or the new formula is if it sells, it leads, or if it trumps, it leads? In the US right now. Since the tragic attacks of September 11 and the rise of broadcast terrorism, our newsrooms are faced with unprecedented challenges. Do you broadcast videotapes uploaded by terrorists showing reality TV executions? Or do you broadcast interviews of hostages and allow your organization to be used for terrorist propaganda? This is uncharted waters until now. If you don't report on a story, someone else will do. And this raises a major challenge to news executives who are walking a tightrope between journalism ethics and the urge to outscoop other networks and gain bigger audience share. Should we keep away stories or videos from reaching the masses? And can we still do that? I am delighted to be discussing these issues as well others with someone who has participated and witnessed the evolution of today's media landscape. Please join me all in welcoming a very good journalist who's been connecting the world for over 2 decades right now. Thank you so much for being in Beirut, Becky Anderson,
Thank
and
you
the
very
floor
much
is yours.
indeed. And those are all incredibly good questions.
Thank you.
So let's get on with it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, look, it's an absolute honour to be here with you all. Salam alaikum. My Arabic is bad, and my French isn't much better. So thank you for doing this with me in English. I have been in Abu Dhabi now for 2 years, but coming in and out of this region for about 19 or 20. And you're right to say that I'm celebrating 21 years in journalism this year, during which time I have to say I think everything has changed, but nothing has changed. And if I can explain a little bit of what I mean by that, the way that we deliver and the way that we consume our news has completely changed in that time. Facebook, Twitter, whatever else you want to talk about so far as social media and lots of online digital tools have changed the way that we access a breaking story, particularly in the first instance. Twitter was very resonant right at the beginning in the first 15 minutes of a breaking news story. And that continues to be the case. The way that we engage with an audience has changed completely. A lot of our audience on CNN comes to us via Facebook these days, and we have absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. We engage with that. The most vital commodity, though, to any news organisation is trust. So if everything has changed in one way, in the way that we gather and deliver our news, in the way that we use technology in the field, we used to lump around 16, 17, 18 technology cases just to be able to get a live shot up from Beirut or Amman or wherever we were going. These days we can do it on a couple of cards, you know, and a really good cameraman. So technology has changed. Technology has changed the way we gather news, the way that we present news, and the way that we all consume the news. But what hasn't changed are the fundamental principles of journalism. And you can cross-examine me on this after, as we talk. But good journalism is about trust, and that means it is about accuracy, it is about balance, and it is about impartiality. And if I do nothing else as a journalist, I've promised myself, my family, my friends, and the organisation that I work for that you will get that out of me. May, I know, regularly talks about the basic tenets of journalism, which again haven't changed. The who, why, what, where, when, and how are the questions that we have to start every question that we ask ourselves or anybody else about when we are covering stories. There is another very big change in that 21 years that I thought we'd just sort of pause on and reflect on for a moment. And that's one that I've witnessed over the time that I've been a journalist, not just for CNN, but for other organisations. And now, as the managing editor for CNN in the Middle East, it's one that as an executive is keeping me awake at night, and that is the safety of our staff. I know that resonates here in this room. Journalists today are targets, more so than they have ever been before, and I know that each and every one of us in this room is well aware of that, and May, you are an amazing, amazing survivor. Thank you. As a managing editor and as a deployable journalist myself, in this region particularly, the safety of our staff is absolutely paramount, and there are extremely important stories in this region particularly, which are now almost unacceptably dangerous to cover, which should bother all of us, not just journalists. But being a journalist is about making a difference. There is a really thin line between bravery and bravado. Mary Colvin, who lost her life in Syria a couple of years ago, always talked about how important it was when she was in a situation of security and knew that she was going after a story where she might be at a lot of risk. She tried to ride the line between bravery and bravado. Not everybody, it doesn't work for everybody, but it's a great balancing act. I believe getting a story told is important, and being a woman at the front of telling those stories is massively important. We talked about how this session is about reporting groundbreaking stories that move nations. So let me give you just a couple of examples of how I think some of my colleagues, my female colleagues, have been doing exactly that of late. Nema El-Bagir, I know, joined you guys a couple of years ago. She's a dear friend and colleague of mine. She is a Sudanese woman. She is a Sunni Muslim. Her award-winning coverage for CNN last year
has just been rewarded with a Royal Television Society Award for Specialist Journalist of the Year. That is for an American organisation, don't forget, up against all the loftiness of the British broadcasting establishment. They were the judges. It's a bit like NBC, CBS and ABC giving an award to BBC World or one of BBC Plymouth or something from, you know, it's a big deal. Her investigations last year included people smuggling from the Nile Delta in fishing boats to Rome, undercover reporting of children for sale in Nigeria. She was offered 2 herself for 500 quid, and an encounter with a mother and a daughter who practiced female genital mutilation. Clarissa Ward, who is new to CNN at the moment, is a fantastic journalist, happens to be a female. She is a fantastic journalist in and of her own right. She's just been undercover in Syria for a week. Even as executive at CNN, I only knew when she was on her way back out of Syria. She is covering on the ground and has been going in and out of Syria over the last 5 years, the stories of the people behind the politics of that story, which, lest we forget, is the only thing that we should really care about at the end of the day. Arwa Damon, I think, has also joined you here. She has been absolutely tireless in her reporting and documenting of the lives of refugees who are affected by the Syrian crisis, by the Afghan crisis, and by the crisis in Iraq as well. She has been tireless in her efforts in reporting from here, from Jordan, from Turkey, where there's a massive impact, and on the mass migration through Europe. And let me tell you, the viewer's appetite for these stories ebbs and flows. And our job as journalists is to make sure that the important stories, the stories that count, the stories that we can make a difference with telling, are in front of people's eyes all the time, whether the appetite is rich or not. We will spend the next year at CNN, I will admit, making sure that we provide creative and distinctive journalism so that the Syria conflict, which, believe me, I'm not convinced is going away anytime soon, whatever they say so far as the truce is concerned at the moment, we will make sure that is in front and centre in people's eyes so that that story isn't forgotten. Because when the stories go away and they're not sexy, and you're right to point that out, you know, what makes good news these days? If it isn't sexy, then the story goes away. But these things are about making a difference. I'd like you to ask me about the Freedom Project at some stage and our efforts to fight modern-day slavery, because we do have examples when, quite frankly, we do advocacy journalism these days, when we are completely transparent about that. Modern-day slavery doesn't have a good side. You can't balance that reporting. So the Freedom Project has been something we've been on for 5 years, and I think it's a really good example of when stories and journalism can make a difference and you can be positive and noisy about it.
But what's the positioning of the Arab world when it comes to the Freedom Project? We saw the uprising in Egypt. We saw intensive coverage from CNN. But how do you think you are contributing in bringing those voices out? And after seeing what happened, do you think it was the right decision to cover it that much, to give so much platform to many voices without really assessing the outcomes?
I'm glad you're asking me whether we think it was a good idea to cover it that much, as opposed to, in some parts of the Arab world, not covering it at all, maybe, or covering it with a very partisan and unbalanced approach. There is a very thin line these days between coverage of a story which can be very partisan, and clearly every story it can be partisan, and propaganda. Let me take ISIS as an example. At CNN, we don't show ISIS beheading victims, nor do most other media organisations, and that was a decision that was taken about 18 months to 2 years ago by most organisations. That was simply feeding their propaganda. This is a scourge, and we don't want to feed the beast.
But it's out there.
We cover, but it's out there. If you are sensible enough, and we have to try very hard to continue to convince people that social media isn't news, it's people sharing stuff, and that we can help that stuff to inform what we do. But as Salzman said earlier on, you need 3 decent sources on a story to make sure that it's a story in and of its own right. So yes, I mean, ISIS is, and extremist organisations are using social media in a very, very active and proper, you know, providing propaganda with that. However, we know what we shouldn't cover, but what should we cover? And we've been asking ourselves this as an organisation. This sort of alludes back to a certain extent, what you're talking about with the Arab Spring, but let's be very specific about it with ISIS. No to cutting off the heads of victims. That is just despicable, and we shouldn't be disseminating that. But should we sit on Paris for 2 weeks as an organisation? That's a question we ask ourselves. The Paris attacks, which were owned by and bragged about by the ISIS organisation, does 2 weeks worth of solid coverage when we are doing this because we truly believe this is a story that people need to hear about with the depth and breadth of analysis that an organisation like mine can assume to bring to the story. But 2 weeks keeps them in the news for 2 weeks. So this is a struggle for all media organisations. What do we cover? How do we cover? To what extent do we cover stories? Particularly, I think, in this region where there is a lot of fractured media and social media is used as a propaganda tool.
Absolutely, but the Paris story was about the location because it happened in Paris. Well, every day the same is happening in Syria, and sometimes it's not even in the headline. It's not anymore in the headline.
You have to keep it in the headlines.
Absolutely. I'm going to leave the questions for the floor. If there's any participations, microphones. Who has a question? Here.
Hello. Hi. I tried to see if anyone else was going to ask. I went to King's College London, and there we had a publication called Strife, which was a student-led publication. So I was one of the editors there, and when I moved back to Beirut, as we were talking about Paris, and the Beirut attack happened, and then the Paris attack happened consecutively. There was a lot. I was interviewed by my former publication and another person from Paris. And when they asked us the same questions, a lot of the questions were, how did you feel the media covered the different stories? And as a person from Beirut, and we also saw what happened in Paris, for example, as the person who works for CNN, how do you, for example, I don't want to say justify, but the fact that you covered Paris for 2 weeks and other bombings or terrorist attacks that happen in the Middle East and other areas that are more volatile aren't given as much attention. Doesn't this feed to the idea of what ISIS tries to propagate, that the West doesn't care about the people of the Middle East? And
that's a question we're asking ourselves. But let me throw it back to you. We cover. I mean, I do a show once a day, every day, from the Middle East, through the prism of the Middle East, and we inform everything that goes across the network. But that show focuses on the Middle East, and every single day. Paris was just 2 weeks. When I say 2 weeks, it's 10 days. And not every hour was devoted wall to wall with Paris. But clearly, we can get in. There are, you know, journalism is about getting your journalists in and getting the stories out. And we have to be a lot more creative and clever about how we get the stories in and out of Libya and Syria, for example, than we do when we can fly the entire network, if needs be, into Paris, and we're able to function there. You know, news gathering, news is about input and output, as you rightly know. And so the easier we can get in, the easier we can tell the story. And the Arab Spring allowed us to do exactly that. And again, you know, I don't think you could accuse the international media of not having covered that story. Perhaps you were discussing whether, or we were discussing whether we, you know, might have covered it too much. But, you know, I don't think it's fair necessarily. There may be a perception about how we would cover the rest of the Middle East and about the fact that we might be bereft in that. I don't buy that as a journalist, nor as a managing editor of this region. I'm very, very proud of the amount of work that we do in this region and the way that we cover this region at the moment. And I hope that by having one of the main primetime shows here, which is my show, that we are but that we continue to cover the region perhaps in a better way than we ever have before, through the prism of the people of the region, not through the prism of somebody else's State Department, for example.
I would like to elaborate on this point, especially what you are doing in the region. You are based in Abu Dhabi, and we were talking about things that sell on TV. There's a crisis right now. we know that TVs, most TVs, who's taking the decision? The journalist? Most of the time, it's not the journalists, the executives. They might be businessmen. They need to keep this institution running. So this is when the problem comes.
Yeah, I don't know if that's changed very much. I mean, CNN has been around for 35 years, and it was the original disruptor. But it's also always been a commercial organization. I mean, unless you are Al Jazeera, I think, funded. You know, publicly funded. I mean, the BBC is publicly funded, but it's held to account by every single taxpayer. Taxpayer has to pay 160 quid a year. So, you know, I think there have always been. I mean, in an organisation like CNN's, the editorial decisions are made by the editorial teams.
The editorial team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've never been asked to ask a question of anybody. I have never been told that we have an editorial remit for anything or any story.
Okay,
so I can say that with my hand on my heart.
But who's deciding the agenda nowadays? Who's deciding that in the Middle East, right now, I want to cover Dubai and not Iraq. I would like to cover more Qatar and not Syria. Who's taking this kind of decisions?
That's individual. That is news gathering teams, it's editorial teams, it's planning teams, all of which are meetings that I'm in all the time. It's a show team like my own. It's where we've got our news gatherers at any one time. You can only, like I say, you can be creative about how you cover stories without a journalist being on the ground. But generally, as a traditional news organisation, you will cover the stories where your journalists have been deployed. Now, that is a planning process. It revolves around planning for events. It also revolves around breaking news stories.
Sure.
I don't think it's changed that much.
Okay. Microphone, please. Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
سناء الجاك منلاحظ انه الاخبار او القصص الاخباريه تحديدا ما بقى تقدر تغير.
We cannot change anymore through news and stories. There's no change coming out of stories.
All right.
ست سناء كفيلة لأفهم أكثر.
بالاول كان خبريه مثل ووتر جيت تقلب نظام. خبر عن سجين مظلوم طلعوا من السجن. حاليا كل المجازر اللي عم نشوفها ما عم بتغير بالاحداث اللي عم تصير. صار الاعلام كانه بلا فايده، مهمته اخباريه فقط، وهيدي المهمه ممكن تتولاها وسائل الاتصال الاجتماعي، التواصل الاجتماعي. قد ايه الاعلام صار ما بقى عنده القدره على التغيير مثل ما كان بالاول. يعني صور الاطفال اللي عم تموت بسوريا ما عم تغير شيء، معلومات وقصص عن خبريات واسلحه كيماويه عم تستخدم ما عم تغير شيء. ليه الاعلام صار عاجز هالقد بهيدي الفتره اللي عم نشوف فيها اكبر مجازر ممكنه بالتاريخ الحديث؟ شكرا.
شكرا ست سناء. هو يمكن السؤال مهمة الإعلام التغيير أو لا؟ رح نسألها إذا هيدي مهمة الإعلام. Did you get the question? Did you get it?
Okay. You can just repeat
no,
it for me.
She's asking why we don't see change anymore, despite all the bad news around us, despite that the information is out there everywhere, everybody's informed, but we don't see repercussions, we don't see imminent change.
I think there's two questions here. Is there, are we seeing enough change, and are we seeing change quickly enough? And is journalism still about making a difference? And I think journalism is still about making a difference, and I think we can still and do still make a change. I would love to have seen change come quicker in Syria, absolutely. But we alongside other organisations in civil society, NGOs, the media as a fourth estate, I think we still do play a role, a significant role. I think we're doing better than perhaps we will be given credit for in this region. I want to talk about the Freedom Project, because I think that's a really good example of how we can be positive and noisy. And I was saying it's something we're immensely proud of at CNN. It's intentionally and transparently non-partisan. Partisan, non-objective. It's got a viewpoint. And its viewpoint is that a multi-billion-dollar industry that enslaves people, puts them in bonded labour, puts women into prostitution and travels them across borders is wrong. And so the project that we've been on for 5 years, which has involved 400 investigative journalism pieces, which I've been involved in alongside my colleagues, we are able to document loosely, and this is by talking to NGOs, has affected amplifying the voice for victims. It's highlighted effective prevention and victim assistance. It's helped to investigate enterprises that have been involved. It's affected real change. It has contributed to changing laws. It's contributed to corporate practices in countries where slavery and bonded labour is rife being changed. I'm talking about the UK, as well as Sierra Leone, as well as Pakistan, as well as the Philippines, as well as places across the Middle East. It's led to more than 1,000 modern-day slaves being at least receiving assistance, if not being unenslaved, and generating about $30 million for organisations who are involved in helping and providing assistance. So we can always do better. But with projects like the Freedom Project, which we started, but then we engage and encourage every viewer and consumer of CNN to get involved with. There are stories amongst the refugees that allude to the Freedom Project and modern-day slavery. Enormous stories that we are on all the time. So I absolutely understand that we aren't on everything, and I understand that Syria is an incredibly frustrating story for all of us. But we are out there.
Yes.
And I think, you know, I think journalists should be given a little bit more credit than perhaps they are in this region.
Yes. I think Sana was trying to focus on the mission. Are we supposed to cover the stories, to inform people, or is it part of our job to shape a public opinion?
We're supposed to make a difference. I think journalists go into journalism to make a difference, and make a difference in a positive way.
Yeah. Okay.
How do you think the international media could improve its coverage of women in the Middle East? Where do you think it's failing, and what recommendations do you have to change that?
Okay, so I'm actually not an advocate of suggesting this is a failing system at all. I mean, I can't think of many male journalists in the Middle East that I admire more than the women that I admire. In fact, I can probably name many, many, many more female journalists in the Middle East than I can name male journalists. So already, I think women in the media are powerful in the Middle East, and we can all provide great examples for and training for and empowerment for women who are in the media and want to be in the media. We ran a journalism course a couple of Saturdays ago in Abu Dhabi for local Emirati and regional young female journalism students. There are about 60 or 70 women who came in to join us for the day. It was fantastic. 55 of those women I'd have had into an internship in London, New York, Atlanta, or Abu Dhabi. Fantastic potential recruits for us and other organisations. So I think it's about providing mentorship. I think it's about providing support. It's about providing support on the ground. It's about people like me and you and everybody else letting people know that we're out there, that they should write to us, they should get in touch with us, we should provide them the support that they need. But I don't think that we're doing a failing job in this region, actually. I think that women are increasingly empowered. I think it's up to women and men in this region to be empowered. It's up to the men who run organisations as well as the women who run organisations to get people empowered. I think we can get stuck in the weeds saying nothing's changing, because I think it is changing out here. I feel very positive about it.
Please. ماي انت مسك الختام ماي.
I wanted to know how much do you see that the CNN or the journalism in general, the media, is objective regarding some issues in the Middle East. For example, if we take Palestine, or if we take Syria now, or Lebanese, they are in a certain distance from other. يعني, they are not objective as you might say. يعني, we see it very clearly. It's not objective. When you spoke about ISIS, for example, or the resistance in Syria, it's not the same. You focus on something and you don't focus on the other side of the story. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not sure the question was.
Can we give the microphone to the lady over here? Thank you. Yes, Becky.
If you were a Lebanese journalist, what would be your cause? In which front line would you be?
That's a really good question. Thank you. And I will try and address the other question as well. My cause would be for women and kids. And my cause would be to make sure that all women and young children are empowered, and increasingly empowered all the time. I think we can do that through things like the Freedom Project, that, as I say, you know, we have the facility to, you know, be pretty hand on heart about the fact that it's advocacy journalism, not journalism. But advocacy journalism has its place. You know, news is about news, and we have to be really clear about that. And we have to be really clear about, and I allude to the question from the lady behind as well, you know, I don't believe in journalism that isn't balanced, doesn't have integrity, isn't truth, and isn't accurate. Now, I'm not sure that this is a region where you could hold all media organisations to account along those lines, but I work for an international media organisation, and we absolutely believe in those tenets. And I think that oftentimes people perceive the media more than they actually watch or consume it these days. I challenge you to a certain extent to find me a story where you might suggest that as the international media, we're not covering an issue in a balanced and fair way. But I do think there's an issue here in the region.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't hear. We don't. Look at the multi-platforms. I mean, news isn't just about a 2-minute report that you see on television. And you know what, by the way, most of us aren't watching television that much anymore, right? We're using our devices. Thank goodness televisions are just another big device these days. Otherwise, I'd be a bit of a dinosaur. But, you know, we are kind of platform agnostic these days. But don't forget that most people under the age of, 45, 40, 35, aren't just consuming their news in 2-minute sound bites on television. They're consuming their news, they're platform agnostic and device agnostic. And what you will find within the multi-platforms where news is now delivered, across where news is now delivered, you will find the depth and breadth, the analysis, if you're looking for it. I'm absolutely determined. I think the multi-platform world that both local and international organisations now have to disseminate their content is fantastic. It provides a much wider berth for balanced, accurate truth. Give it a go.
Okay, we'll take also 2 questions at a time, since we're running out of time. تفضلي.
I'm May Abi Ael. I'm a newspaper journalist. Do you think that the newspapers still have the same effects as the televisions, knowing that we are all journalists and we cover the same stories and we encounter the same crises and dangers? Do you see the newspaper still?
I think the printed word is back. Actually, I don't know whether it's that you have to read it in an old-fashioned, you know, in a open it up newspaper, or whether you consume your words online. I think the printed word is back and is more powerful than it ever was before because of the way that we are consuming our news these days. I mean, we have to, you know, I have to work harder than ever to make a really you know, a good news show that's going to kick you in the face and really deliver these days. Because I'm competing with my colleagues at CNN and across the sort of multi-platform world in amazing content that is being driven across the printed word online. Documentary making has never been better. Investigative work, content has never been richer than it is in 2016. I think it's an absolutely fantastic world of media news content these days. It's just that I don't know whether the old-fashioned style of reading a newspaper like this is as powerful as it was. I mean, they've just launched a new newspaper in London, for example.
Do you think if you were a newspaper journalist, you would be famous as a...
I would hope so. I never wanted to be a TV journalist. No. Believe me, when I went to university, they asked me if I wanted to do the broadcast.
No,
I was so not interested. I thought I wasn't really sure they were real journalists who were doing the broadcast stuff. I wanted to be in print journalism. I was in print journalism for the first 4 years of my working life, and then I kind of slightly stumbled into broadcast journalism, which I've enjoyed immensely, and I hope hasn't in any way sort of dumbed down or made any less worthy the journalism that I've always wanted to do, and I hope I am doing now. But yeah, I mean, I know where you're coming from with that question, but I hope it's not. I hope it's not true.
شكرا مي. تفضل.
Yeah. Oh, we have to put it on.
On.
عم قول للمحامية جمانة الشويري، أنا اللي بدي أسأله إنه الإعلام بس يكون منحاز كيف بيقدر يعمل تغيير؟ يعني عم نشوف نحن الجرائم عم بتعم العالم كله، بنفس الوقت ما عم نشوف معالجة لهالجرائم، بل عم تكتر وتزيد. الانحياز عم بيكون مثلا بيجي بسمع العربية بشوف انه عم تحكي الحدث من وجهة نظرها، بسمع الجزيرة بتحكي الحدث من وجهة نظرها. طالما الهدف من الإعلام هو تسليط الضوء على المشكلة ومعالجتها، نحن ما عم نشوف هلا هيك، عم نشوف انه الإعلام عم بيكون انحياز، انه كيف بنقدر نعالج هيدي المشكلة. بس هيك، ميرسي.
Please.
It's a problem, isn't it? But it's always been a problem, and I think it will continue to be a problem. So,
watch all of them.
Yeah,
Maybe
not all
you
of
get
them.
it.
No, I don't. You know, look. I mean, I do think there is a lot of partisan journalism in this region from local media. I do, and I think, you know, I think you see it across social media. I think you see it across traditional media, and you don't have to read it and you don't have to watch it, right? Most of it is commercial. So if you don't have to watch it, and you don't have to read it, and you didn't, it wouldn't be around. You know, I mean, I don't know whether there's another answer for that. You make noise, you object to it. You know, we were talking about getting up and making noise as not just women, but just as a generation. You know, I mean, it just make some noise about it. You know, what's your answer to that? I just because I'm in the media, I don't have the answer to that question. I wish I did. It's one of those superpowers that I wish I had. How can I prevent, you know, the media from being biased in certain regions and it not being good for the general public, in not telling the real stories? I don't have that superpower. I'll let you know if I take it on.
Well, until today, local media is part of, let's say, منظومة الحكم. It's part of the governing, the system. It's part of the system. It's not totally independent, and that's a very big problem when it comes to impartiality.
Soft power. It's used as soft power media in many places, right? I mean, but that's as old as the book.
Yeah,
you know.
Unfortunately, but we're
still dealing with it.
We're still there. Tanya, Assis.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Tanya Assis. I'm not at all a journalist. I'm an artist, an engaged artist.
Excellent.
What I wanted to say, because you mentioned two very important things about empowerment and making the change. Of course, news you can just cover and make the change. I think every person needs to be empowered to feel he can be the change. Unfortunately, in the news today, we just see the bad side of the things happening. I will take just a simple example. In Lebanon, you are all aware of the garbage crisis. At the beginning, there was a civil movement, and everyone went on the street to defend this cause and say we want to live in a healthy country. I was home. Although I'm very active, I didn't go down. I waited a little bit to see what will happen on the square, and we saw what happened, unfortunately. The news covered the bad side of the movement, what happened, all the disputes and the threats and the fights. And we forgot the good things and the other part of the square. So now when we talk together and we say we have to do something, people don't want to go there anymore because they feel that they will be beaten or whatever. So why don't we focus on when the news is covering? Of course, you have to focus on what's really happening. So people are there, they are fighting, but a lot of people are there peacefully. So let's encourage people to see the good part of it and be encouraged to go there.
Absolutely. I fundamentally agree with you. Absolutely. And that's not, you know, and it's not the media, this isn't the media's fault. You need to be addressing the politicians on the issues that count. It's the media's role as the fourth estate in any decent democracy to actually hold politicians, the legislature, the executive and the judiciary to account. Now, I realise that that doesn't necessarily happen and it doesn't function as well in some parts of the world as it might in other parts of the world, but you're absolutely right. You know, if the media is skewed, don't rely on the media to tell the story. Get out there, you know. I mean, again, it's about empowering the right people to get into politics. It's about empowering women to get into politics here so that you don't have the trash issue for the media to need to cover. I mean, you know.
When we talk about the refugees, today everyone hates the refugees because they are a source of troubles. But a lot of refugees have did amazing careers, and we don't highlight them. We need to keep
going.
The focus is always on the bad place, so people are not empowered because they need to look up to someone and to see someone successful and be successful like him. But if you only see bad things, we don't want to go there. We don't want to help. We don't want to. So it's just covering the news, but focusing on just this tiny little spot that no one is giving attention to. And here I salute Paula because she always tried to do it in her shows, and it really makes a change because people want to listen to good news and the
Tanya,
positive.
it gets no ratings.
Out of it.
It gets no ratings. Let's tackle that. That's the big problem here. If it doesn't bleed, it takes no ratings.
No, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. But it doesn't mean that a good news show shouldn't be like a good dinner party, where we start off talking about news and current affairs and politics and ISIS, whatever you want to. But you know, at my decent dinner parties, we end up talking about arts and culture. We talk about young entrepreneurs. We talk about what the kids are up to. We talk about what's really making a difference to people's daily lives. And I think if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. Sure, I get it, and it's still like that. There are, you know, and we have to be very mindful about what it is, and we have to continue to be mindful about how we cover stories and how we make a difference to the people who need a voice. But I really think that you can balance out news these days. I think we have some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder in this. I mean, I'm fatigued by the news cycle in this region, you know, and I'm not even out on the ground generally these days. I'm back in the studio actually, you know, just putting together a show. I'm exhausted by the news cycle in this region. But you know, we were out in Jordan last year and Cairo last year and Istanbul the year before, Tunisia this year, doing live Connect the World as live with audiences, where we had entertainers in, we had artists in, we had young startup entrepreneurs. I spoke to a number of young Lebanese entrepreneurs who I said, you know, does it help or hinder being a woman? And one of the youngsters said to me, it doesn't help or hinder being a woman at all. It would help if there was electricity 24 hours a day so I could run my business, you know, my business could function. And that's the story that she wanted me to tell. It wasn't a story about whether she'd been empowered as a woman and whether as a 26-year-old she was more or less successful than any other, you know, 26-year-old male. It was, you know, so I honestly think we need to start telling some good news stories as well. You know, you've got to balance your news.
Yes.
You know, just because it bleeds, it shouldn't lead. I mean, it may lead, but it shouldn't infect and inform your entire broadcast. And it doesn't on mine, I can tell you. They're not allowed.
I totally agree with this, but I was just trying to tell Tanya why it's not on the news, because people are competing over ratings.
Well, then it should.
Over ratings, and that's the problem. May your
to
input.
conclude, as usual, I have the last question. I'm a journalist. I won't ask any question regarding journalism because you had so many questions.
You got the answers.
To conclude in brief, what's your recipe? How Becky Anderson became the famous Becky Anderson we know?
Oh my goodness
in
gracious.
few words, because you are also an inspirational story, and we need, since you are here with us today, to know a little bit more about you.
Well, I mean, like I said, I started in journalism after I finished college, and I really wanted to be in print journalism, and sort of slightly fell into the broadcast journalism world. But I think and I think it was one of the young ladies here who was asking about how, there we go, how you become successful, how you get your voice heard. And I think, like any of us here who are successful in anything that we do, and I'm no more successful than anybody else, and just because I'm in journalism and I'm you know, my face is on the telly, it's another job, you know. And I admire and respect everybody for everything that they do in this room.
How
but
did
you know,
you get your first job? How did you get your first job?
I got my first job.
Opportunity.
Yeah, my first job was with Michael Bloomberg, and I'd been for the very competitive Reuters training scheme in London. 7,000 applicants, and we got down to 7, and the 4 who got the job, I didn't get a job with them, 4 who did, had 7 languages, upwards of 7 languages each. And at the time, my French was good enough to get away with actually suggesting that I spoke it fluently. My Italian wasn't bad and my English was all right. But that wasn't enough for Reuters at the time. And I was absolutely mortified. I felt like the whole world had fallen apart for me, because I thought Reuters was absolutely the right place to start as a young print journalist. And then Michael Bloomberg happened to be setting up an organisation called Bloomberg with some journalists, in inverted commas, basically people writing stories around the information on his box at the time. And he was actually paying a little bit more than the average in London at the time, and they sent us to Princeton, and they sent us to, he took on a whole bunch of people. I was one of his first recruits in print journalism, and he sent us back to, this was financial journalism, by the way, sent us back to Princeton. We had to do courses in math journalism, Fibonacci graphs. So my international finance wasn't anything like it was after I started working at Bloomberg. He invested in his journalism, by the way, in his financial journalists. He really invests in them. So I started off with a really bespoke area of expertise. And I think that made an enormous amount of difference for me, because it made me, I mean, I was very successful very quickly in the world of print business journalism, and then subsequently CNBC and various other things before I came to CNN. I think it's good to have role models. Martha Gellhorn was a role model of mine, an amazing champion of women journalists, wrote about the Second World War, the Spanish Civil War. So yeah, I think you need to have role models. I think you need aspirations, people who inspire you. You need to take a little bit, watch for the opportunities, watch out for them, take those opportunities and ride a little bit of luck. And you know what? It's a really bumpy ride as well. You know, you're making it look very easy in the job that you do. I'm probably making it look easy in the job that I do, but it hasn't been easy all the way along. But it's been a terrific ride. I mean, it's been a bumpy one, but it's been, I think I've probably woken up 10 days of my life and said, I don't want to go to work. So, you know, if that's the case, then I guess I'm very blessed. But yeah, it was a bumpy ride. Yeah. It didn't start easily for me.
We are blessed to have you here in Beirut. Becky Anderson, thank you for this wonderful panel. Once you're on a panel, you remember the good things about this business, and you forget the bumpy ride. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for a wonderful audience, great questions. Rola, I give you back the floor. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed. I'm very honoured to be with you all.